My name's Nigel Church. I'm with Hewlett Packard, part of the what we call the client virtualization team. We've been in this technology business for some time, so we've always called it client virtualization. Others will refer to it as desktop virtualization, although we believe it's a little bit more than just the desktop these days. I've also heard client virtualization being used to describe the new sort of emerging tier 1 client hypervisors. So the terminology is a little bit confusing right now, but I'm sure it will work its way out. So I might just flip between desktop virtualization and client virtualization as I go through here. So let's do a quick survey. It's probably unscientific, but I mean, how many of you actually have some form of desktop virtualization in production? Wow, okay. How many of you got VDI in production? 2, okay. All right. So what I've got today is I'm a little nervous because in talking to groups like this before, the range of expertise varies from totally confused with all the hype, all the way up to folks that have got the scars on their back after rolling out a VDI in production. So what I'm going to go through is sort of 2 parts. I've got a first part of this presentation where I'll talk about the various technologies that make up desktop virtualization, how you would use them, what we're seeing, how we're seeing customers deploy them. And then I'm going to dig into our VDI reference architecture for VMware View, which I want to sort of give you an update on what our engineers have done in that box, because it's pretty exciting stuff. At the risk of, I don't want to be too much of a sales presentation, but I want to just highlight some of the technologies. And then I want to zero in on how we size that box and how we do sizing in general at HP, because this time last year we tried to get a headline grabber and saying that we can do VDI for under $1,000 a seat. And it certainly grabbed the headlines for a while there. And what we had after that was all our competitors coming out of the woodwork with obviously a number lower than $1,000. So there is no industry standard out there. And a lot of customers we talk to that are in a bind have sort of either underscoped, undersized the implementation of VDI because they got incorrect data, or they've had to sort of put their hands in the pocketbook and buy more equipment. So we've had several instances of that. So sizing is a really hot button for me, and I want to walk you through how we do it, so that that may better equip you when HP or another vendor comes in to ask the right questions, because it's all a question of what are your users doing, and how does that match up with what the box is sized at. So I'll go into some detail there. So if you've been around HP any time, you've probably seen this slide. We use this slide to describe server sprawl within the data center, and the fact that we're all sort of wrestling with operational costs that outweigh even the cost of acquiring the equipment. So 70% of the budget is tied up in operations. And how do we get from that point to having the infrastructure really tied to the applications in order to deliver IT as a service? And so, but when we look outside the 4 walls of the data center, we see a very similar situation in that we're seeing end users using a whole plethora of client devices to access their stuff, right? And as IT folks, we love standardization, right? That's how we become efficient. And what's happening in the end user community now? We've all got smartphones, we've got iPads, we've got laptops, we've got desktops. That is becoming an increasing headache for us in terms of managing all those endpoint devices. So what desktop virtualization does for us is separates the management of the image from the endpoint device. And I would throw out the thought that that really needs to happen for a whole desktop strategy to be not to go down the same path of where you get burgeoning operational costs. So, we believe the data center of the future is going to be based on a converged infrastructure, and by that I don't mean that we're going to sort of get rid of all the various levels of expertise across servers, storage, network, virtualization. What I mean is that we believe that infrastructure should be designed in a converged form at the outset, as opposed to coming together in the data center as disparate parts. So, and this is more than just a nice vision on the slide. In fact, when we go through our VDI solution, you'll see that we've actually designed that from the ground up for VDI, and it is a true converged infrastructure because we've got everything contained in a singular modular fashion that can scale. So I'll get to that in the second half of the presentation. So challenges facing us in sort of this desktop IT. I'm guessing that most of you have got what I call the pallet-based model for your desktop infrastructure. You buy a pallet of desktops from whoever happens to be the cheapest, hopefully HP, and then you slap an image on it. You have some kind of patch management process. You give your users admin rights in the main, and no, somebody doesn't, but most people do. And then you throw it out there and you hope they don't mess it up. And if they do, of course, you have to send somebody out to fix it, or you field a phone call. So that whole model is getting a little shaky when you start to add all these new devices to the mix. So this is my family. No, just kidding. Two teenagers is plenty. But the point here is that I think there's a generation, and we've probably raised some of them in this room, born sort of between 85 and 95, that have actually grown up in the digital world. We think we're probably whizzes on the smartphone, but I look at my daughter and she can type 60 words a minute on the smartphone with her thumbs, right? So, when these folks start, and they're starting to enter the workforce now, they're going to have very different demands on how they access their data and sort of devices that haven't been invented yet, right? And we have to, as IT professionals, we have to react to those demands, right? So, even though there are a lot of technical challenges with desktop virtualization, I think this is the macro trend that tells me, anyway, that this is a wave that's not going to change, right? We have to change the way we think about desktop infrastructure. The second area, I'm sure everybody's got a guy like this, right? He's in the bowels of the organization somewhere, and you seek him out when your laptop crashes and you didn't back it up for the last 2 months, right? And he fixes it for you. We did a study with IDC. It's out on our website, and we found that the cost of managing a desktop per year is around, the average cost is around $1,300. Does anybody here have that number for their organization? People know that? No hands. If you're going to roll out VDI, you better know that number. We have a TCO calculator on our website, a linear calculator. You can plug and play numbers to figure out some of these. But in order to justify this technology, you really need to know that number. If you have a well-managed desktop, if you're using encryption and patch management, that number may be down to around $500 a user. But if you go down the desktop virtualization route with thin clients, it can drop to around $425 a user. And that is largely due to the fact that 80% of that $1,200 is support. So you really drastically reduce your support load when you go into a desktop virtualization scenario with thin clients. This security and compliance is probably the number one issue we hear from customers, especially in the financial services industry. Has anybody got the dear sir, from your financial institution, dear sir, we're sorry, but we think we may have lost your social security number, and here's a year's subscription to Experian. For the past 3 years, I've had free subscriptions to Experian. In fact, the Ponemon Institute did a study. 35% of those security breaches are due to lost laptops, and 10,000 laptops get lost per week in U.S. airports, which is an unbelievable statistic. I still don't believe it, but I certainly, when it goes in that little plastic tray underneath the machine, I make sure it disappears before I go through the scanner, because that's an incredible statistic. And when there is a security breach, the average cost to a company is around $7 million per, and it can be much higher than that, obviously. So, and the beauty of desktop virtualization, obviously, is the only thing coming out of your data center is commands to paint something on a screen. All the data is contained within the data center. So that's very attractive to some folks. And then lastly, how many folks are long overdue for desktop refresh? I'm sure, with the recession, there's some aging desktops around. Plus, we have this Windows 7 thing looming. And I'm hoping that most of you skip Vista. You're probably sitting on XP. It's getting a little old. It's got its problems. So we see a lot of customers taking a step back as they're facing this whole Windows 7 upgrade. And really, it's a good time to take a look at where does desktop virtualization fit in your organization. I mean, clearly it's not everywhere, but it's probably a good inflection point to start thinking about it. So let's just take a step back and figure out where we're headed with all this. In the data center, I mean, you've heard of the journey all week, I'm sure, to the cloud. We went through a period of standardizing our server infrastructure, virtualization on top of that, building on top of that automation, and sort of moving towards this notion of delivering IT as a service, or applications as a service. I think we're on that same path with a very similar endpoint with our client infrastructure. We've coined the term workspace as a service, but it's sort of a similar journey, but it's starting from a different starting point where you really need to start thinking about, how do I separate the management of the endpoint device from the management of the image? How do I look at, and we'll go through the various technologies that you've got in your toolbox, but how do I sort of use the various technologies I've got at my disposal to transmit the information and data to my end user endpoint device, right? So, and I think ultimately we're going to get to the point where, no matter what device I've got, I can access the stuff I need to access, and it's completely transparent to me as to how that gets to my device, right? I mean, that's the ultimate end goal here. We're a long ways from that at the moment, but that's where I believe we're going. Also, if you look at some of the benefits here, they're really stacked in favor of IT. The end user is not, I presume, calling you saying and demanding that you put them on a VDI implementation. I think there's probably some cultural issues around adopting this technology. Even though workplace flexibility and always on sounds kind of neat, I think there's a culture issue that we need to get over in terms of, people, even though, like, my laptop, I mean, it's an HP asset, but I think of it as my laptop. And I've got access rights to that thing, and I don't want IT messing with it unless, of course, it goes wrong, and then I have to go find that guy to get it fixed. So there's some cultural issues. We've seen certain areas, and this is probably a good time to talk about some of the common use cases we're seeing, certain areas where we do see the user community looking for this kind of technology. So the first one I'd throw out is the hospital scenario, right? So doctors need to get instant access to patient information from any, multiple devices. It doesn't, they want to be, moving from floor to floor within a hospital or from building to building, and they want to be able to sort of access the application exactly where they left it, 2 floors down. And when they print something out, it needs to print on the floor they're on, not the floor 2 doors down. So we see a lot of, in the healthcare space, we see a lot of customers very interested in this technology. Education. If you're an IT manager of a school district and your budget just got cut and you have to deal with these, these aging desktops and you want to move to Windows 7, this is a very attractive sort of idea, is to roll out desktop virtualization. And plus the fact that there's probably there's no more malicious user than a student, right? So the idea is, your students come into the classroom, they do their best to mess up whatever you've got on there, but you can wipe it clear and have a pristine image for the next class that comes in. So we see a lot of interest in the healthcare arena around this technology. And then there's sort of the security aspect of this. So you see, obviously financial services. Clearly, if you've got a company where the employee just lost their laptop and it got 10,000 security numbers on it, they're real interested in this technology and trying to keep the data contained in the data center. So those are really three major areas. And then government, we see a lot of government interest, mainly from the security standpoint as well. So on the IT side, clearly there's a lower carbon footprint. Some customers don't go immediately to a thin client. They'll use their existing laptops or desktops. There you still have a support issue, but if you go all the way to the thin client, then it depreciates over 6 to 7 year period versus a 3 to 5. It's using, with a monitor, it's using about 100 watts, whereas a typical desktop, depending on the age, is using 3 to 5 times that. So there's a lot of savings on the power side. Admittedly, you're using more power in the data center, but that's power that you can manage, right? Then it's under control. Lower, more predictable costs. Clearly, if it's all contained within the data center, you're not having to fly people out to fix laptops in remote offices or any of that kind of stuff. Clearly, you can predict your costs better. Scalability, mission critical. One of the things that when we talked to our HP IT organization, one of the things they threw back at us was, we have a well-managed desktop. Why on earth would we pull that all into the data center and make it mission critical? What's the sense in that, right? So there is that aspect to it. If you pull your if you do and deploy a desktop virtualization solution, you're actually pulling it all into the data center, so it becomes mission critical. The good news is you're putting it on equipment that has that sort of resilience and backup capability. So, and then of course, as we mentioned, there's security and the governance. The fact that there's only protocol commands coming out of your data center is very appealing to folks that have security concerns. So I wanted to spend some time talking about the various technologies. So when most people think of desktop virtualization, they think of VDI, Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. That is the technology that's getting the most, dare I say, hype. Just about every magazine I pick up or article these days is talking about VDI. In fact, I've heard people use the term VDI to encompass the whole thing. But there's a lot more tools in the toolbox than just VDI. So terminal services or session-based computing is another form of server-based computing. In other words, it's residing in the data center. It's been around for many, many years. I think a lot of people that raise their hand probably have some form of terminal services implementation. It's very It's very efficient in terms of server hardware. You can run 100, 150 users on a single server. The users are, session-based. They're accessing the same image. And it used to be, in the early days, sort of a somewhat performance-inhibiting implementation. But now with bigger pipes and the ability to even personalize the sessions with folks like AppSense can actually personalize the sessions, then it's not your father's terminal services anymore. So typically, if you've got users that are using one or two applications, terminal services is probably a good thing to look at, a good implementation. Think bank tellers. Not a very high degree of personalization, a few applications. Bank tellers, maybe people in a call center that are entering information, that kind of thing. Those are sort of typical implementations we see for terminal services or session-based computing. Okay. I talk to lots of customers, and they think they need VDI, and when we actually sort of talk through it, many of them, not all of them, obviously, but some of them, think, end up with a terminal services or session-based computing. And then we have VDI, which I view as a single-user version of server-based computing, where everybody has their own virtual machine sitting back at the data center. Clearly, it's a more expensive scenario. You're taking, and primarily the big cost factor there is storage, because you're taking, storage that on the desktop, which is maybe $1 a gigabyte, and you're putting it on storage in the data center, which may be $5 a gigabyte. So storage is a big component of a VDI implementation. So it's much harder to justify up the food chain the upfront capex. And one of the things that we're doing from an engineering standpoint all the time is to try to drive down that initial upfront costs associated with VDI. So a typical VDI user, it's somebody who's running a bunch of applications, probably us folks in the room here. Multiple applications, and we want some degree of personalization, right? We want our, pictures of our dogs on the screen and stuff like that. So, and then finally, we have Blade workstations, which I view as a sort of high-end VDI implementation, where the user is actually communicating with a Blade server, a Blade workstation on a one-to-one basis. So think folks that need high graphics, high compute. So traders, as an example, trader workstations. We actually at HP have all our ASIC development worldwide centered in Houston. So everybody's got their personalized virtual machine that they dial, they link into for overall ASIC design. So those are the three sort of, and so the elephant in the room with all these three technologies is if you have no connection, you have no work, right? That's the elephant in the room, and it is an issue, right? So if you've got mobile workers, how do you deal with that? So enter client hypervisors. So this is a novel idea, right? You run the desktop image on your client. But the difference is you have a hypervisor on the laptop or desktop, mostly laptop. So there's two types that are emerging. Type 1 is where you have the hypervisor sit on the hardware, and then Type 2 where you have a virtual machine sitting on an installed OS. So for the Type 1 hypervisor, I guess the most typical use case there is where you own the asset. A Type 1 hypervisor would work. If you don't own the asset, say if you've got contract workers in India that are using Acer laptops and you're standardized on something else, you could use a Type 2 hypervisor, take your corporate image, really lock it down, encrypt it, and put it on that machine. So the beauty of that is it can be Wild West on the rest of the machine, right? People can be downloading stuff from the internet and installing God knows what, but your corporate image is locked down and secure. And then the beauty of that is when the user is back online, you can sync that back to your data center, sync the image back to the data center. So that's it. Anybody looking at that? That's a fairly new technology. It's been a couple of years, and one person. So 2 persons. Okay. So I think that's ultimately you're going to see a hybrid of sort of VDI and client hypervisors working together in concert, so we can get around this mobility challenge. And then there's some other technologies down at the desktop side, client side, OS boot or OS streaming, where you have essentially a desktop. It might be a desktop you've disabled or you've taken out the hard drive, and you're actually streaming down the OS image from a central server. See, schools do this quite a bit. And of course, there's some smarts built into the streaming technology to make sure that the thing operates quickly from the boot standpoint. And then you've got application streaming, where you're actually streaming the application down. It could be down to run on the local operating system, or it could be down running in a virtual machine. So there's a lot of choices and technologies, and it can be a little confusing as to where do you use which and when, right? So ultimately, I think you're going to end up with a hybrid, a mix, if you will, of different technologies based on what your users are doing, and what devices they're using as well in their whole situation. So what I want to do now is sort of zero in on. Let's get about halfway through. This is the second part of the. So I wanted to zero in on our VDI implementation for VMware View. I'm really proud of what our engineers have managed to come up with here. So basically, we had 2 goals. One was to really make it simple to deploy VDI. I mean, anybody here who's actually had to sit down and try and figure out all the piece parts, where they come from, how they fit together, it's a daunting task. And what we were trying to do here is to really make it simple and easy to deploy VDI, in this case VMware View. And I'll talk about how we size this, but in this particular case, we're running 1,600 productivity users, and I'll define what we mean by a productivity user in a second, but we're running 1,600 productivity users in that one rack. We talk to customers. A couple of years ago, it used to be, I want to run 1,000 users. Now it's, I want to run 30,000 users, or I want to run 100,000 users. I mean, this is a different conversation we're having compared to a year ago. This thing will scale. So if I want 3,200 users, I buy 2 of these and I gang them together. So it's a modular unit you stick in, and you scale it as you go. We've integrated the storage, and I'll talk about it in a little more detail, but we've integrated storage into the rack. So this is truly a converged infrastructure. We designed the storage to be bladed and to be integrated. So there's really no cables coming out the back apart from the protocol commands and the links to the network. Compare that to a typical traditional fiber channel implementation. Many of you have seen that. I mean, it's a mess. So, and we're using our Virtual Connect technology to make it easy to administer this. So there's not this sort of one of the things that we heard from customers is, VDI is great, and the technology is difficult to implement. What's even more difficult is the fact we have to deal with the storage guys, the LAN guys, the virtualization guys, the desktop guys, and they all come to the table with their own favorite things, right? That's the thing that takes months and months and months to get around. So what we've designed here is a box that just sits, you don't have to involve the SAN guys. Well, you have one conversation, but once that's done, it's easy for a single person to administer this box. And compared to the traditional fiber channel SAN solution, this is a hell of a lot cheaper. So I wanted to sort of dig into some of the innovation we put into this. First of all, just to sort of dig into our P4800 bladed SAN. As I said, it's a single administrator box. Compared to the traditional fiber channel SAN, it's very efficient in terms of rack space. I don't need specialized skills. We're using our SAN IQ software to work the high availability and stuff. So, common management interface. This is how it's looking. So we've got 140, 15,000 RPM, 450 gigabyte drives, and we've got those in bays of 35 drives apiece. We have 4 storage blades that are connected redundantly to those 4 storage bays through an array controller and 3 gigabyte SAS switches. So we've got 22 terabytes of usable space on this box, and we've got RAID 5 from the array controller, but the ability to use the SAN IQ software to copy blocks 2, 3, or 4 times. You pay a penalty for that, but we've got high availability built in. And we've tested it with. Everybody knows what a boot storm is, right? Everybody comes in the morning, logs on. That's a boot storm, and we've tested it, and it's well equipped to handle that. There's very low latency, obviously, in this box because we're not going outside. There's no switches to deal with, so it's very low latency, high performance. Flex Fabric and Virtual Connect. Everybody familiar with that technology, or do I need to explain it a little bit? I'll explain it real quickly. So before Virtual Connect, the way there's two ways. There's a pass-through, which is lots and lots of cables, or there's switches where if you have switches, you have to deal with LAN and SAN folks. What we've come up with here is we've instead of linking a profile to a server, we're linking the profile to the bay, and then we're attaching the LAN and SAN, physical LAN and SAN to that profile. So what we can do, what we're actually doing is creating this sort of abstraction layer between the server and the outside world, the LAN and the SAN. What we can also do with this technology is actually dynamically change the bandwidth of the pipe. So I can, if I've got a 10 gigabyte pipe coming out of the back of my server, I can carve that up into different virtual NICs. In a typical 16-server virtualized environment, we're actually replacing, I think it's four HBAs, a whole host of cables, with a couple of what we call Flex 10 modules. So the savings are huge. This is a technology that is growing like crazy. We were 25% of the 10 gigabyte switch market last year when we shipped 3 million ports of this technology. So within our VDI solution, this is how we use that technology. So the single port coming out of our server, the 10 gig, we're actually slicing it up. So we've got 6 gigs for our iSCSI network to the storage, 2 gigs for vMotion activities. We've got some bandwidth there for the management and then for the production. So we're partitioning up, into 4 virtual networks. What this buys for us, because it's all within the enclosure, is just screaming performance and low latency. And it really kicks in when the end user load increases. So when you really need the performance, it really kicks in compared to other iSCSI solutions. The other piece that we've done, and this is part of the integration work we've done with VMware, what we found talking to customers that you use vCenter in the main. If you've got HP gear, you're also using our Insight software. So we actually put together a project to actually integrate the two systems. So now you can actually use, so it's like a tab on the top of the menu from vCenter. You can call up Insight software. So you can do, so for example, I can see pre-failure alerts from my host system coming up into vCenter. So, I'm able to, in that situation, move VMs off of that host system, fix it, whatever it is, and then move the VMs back again. So I'm not switching between different screens. And we've not stopped there. We've actually enhanced that. So we've got storage visibility. So if I need to change, look at the various LUNs and make changes, I can do that all through the comfort of vCenter. I also have end-to-end visibility of the network as well. So on the left-hand side, you can see the VMs all the way through virtual NICs to the endpoint. So we've got a lot of technology that we've integrated into vCenter to make life easier for you. So this is my favorite topic, sizing. So as I said earlier, most of the customer angst around deploying VDI is the fact that you get the sizing wrong to begin with. Make sure you really understand what your users are doing before you even make the move. I would strongly suggest an assessment service. There's tools out there like Lakeside Software where you can actually, run software to gauge what your users are doing. We've been at this for quite some time, since about 2006. So when we first started out, it was sort of really based on server categorization. The typical way we did it back then was to run a couple of scripts using Microsoft RDS into an OS with a couple of apps, and we'd load up VMs until we deemed the performance was unacceptable, and that was our sizing. Some people still do that today. Buyer beware. Okay, understand how folks are getting to the numbers that they're getting to. We found that method of doing it ended up with very overly optimistic results. So over time, we've sort of developed a bunch of test scripts, and it's a two-part operation. You have to sort of do the sizing for your server, and then you do the sizing for your storage. Storage is much more difficult, by the way. So basically, what we've done today is we've defined three user types. So a task worker, a couple of applications, Microsoft Office, Internet Explorer. And then we have what we define as a productivity worker, which got us to the 1,600 number. That's someone who's running, I think we have around 14 applications running. Microsoft Office, we have Outlook open all the time. So we designed scripts around that user scenario. And then we have what we call a knowledge worker, where we actually use 17 applications, and we're using things like Microsoft Visio and Microsoft Media Centers. So we're actually really stressing the system with a knowledge worker scenario. So we've developed, we think we've got around 80 scripts. We have 8 for the task worker. We've got around 60 scripts for our productivity user, which is the sweet spot, and then we've got a dozen scripts for our knowledge worker. And we run these scripts on a predefined sort of sequence. So we're trying to get as close to real world as we can. And as I said, as we get these customer implementations, we go back and we recheck. And we've had to go back a couple of times and sort of question our assumptions about how VDI performance actually works. But so far, I mean, the current testing, I'll give you some numbers. We use G6 processors. We're in the process of testing G7, but with the G6 processors, we're getting 8 to 9 users per core, which is around, on the ones we're using, is 64 to sort of 72 users per core for productivity users. It goes up a little bit if you're using the task worker scenario, between 12 and 14 users per core. Memory didn't seem to be a factor. We have 72 gigabytes of memory on the server, and it barely gets to 45 gigabytes. And memory didn't seem to be a factor in any of our testing. So 8 to 9 users per core for both productive users and knowledge workers was what we tend to see. Now, talking about storage sizing is a whole different ballgame. So what we see there is it runs the gamut. We could see anywhere from 2 to 70 IOPS, anything from 20% write to 95% write. When we look at our task worker scenario, typically that's at the low end. It's sort of 2 to 7 IOPS, around 6 average. But I wouldn't say that's a very common scenario where you're running those kind of users on a VDI implementation. At the sweet spot, the productivity user side, we are seeing around 6 to 21 IOPS, so it's sort of averaging out of the 9-10 range. And then at the knowledge worker, that's where it gets really tricky, because we're up into the 9 to 57 IOPS range. So it's their scaling becomes a real challenge. So there are other areas where you need to watch out for in terms of sizing. When we look at the task worker, for example, we see a 40% read. 60% read, 40% write scenario. When you go to the productivity worker, we're seeing 20% write, 80% read. It's very read intensive. When you get up into that knowledge worker area, we're seeing around 60% write, 40% read. Now, depending on your user scenario, you could actually see the user type flip based on the user scenario. And I'll give you an example. We spoke with an IT manager from a large university yesterday, in fact. He's running 400 VDI users. It's a non-persistent VM. So he's got 12,000 students. And they're all logging in at various times. They're doing very simple operations, maybe even a sort of a task worker scenario. But he's got logins and log outs, and they could be on for 5 minutes, they could be on for 50 minutes. So he's got this continuous boot storm, and we're looking at his read and write, and it's very typical of a knowledge worker, right? It's 60% writes, 40% reads, because he's dealing with this constant boot storm. So you got to watch out. You got to really understand what your users are doing in the various environments, because it can get you. And in fact, that particular case, we're actually working with him on looking at SSD technology to see if we can sort of help him out there. Sorry, hand up? Yes.
Do you have these stats documented anywhere? This would be useful.
Sorry?
Do you have these stats documented anywhere?
Actually, good question. So we have, what we've done with this whole reference architecture, we documented everything. So it's a cookbook. It's about 100 pages. I'll put the web URL up at the end of the presentation, but you can download it for free, and it literally walks you step by step how to put this together. It's literally a cookbook, and it talks about how we got to where we got, right, in terms of how we size this. So another pitfall is if you've got an image and you've got some extraneous or scheduled services in there, like virus scan. Beware, because that can just bring your VDI implementation to its knees, okay? So you've got to be real careful about what you put in your image. But above all, you really need to understand what your users are doing, because that's the key. So I hope I'm giving you some pointers there so that when vendors wander in and say, I can do your VDI for $300, you have a bunch of questions you can now ask them to really understand what they really mean by that. I said we've sized us for 1,600 productivity users. We could actually get, and obviously there's a price there, right? So if you total up the price of the equipment and the licenses, divide by 1,600, you come out to around $750 a user. I think that's roughly where we are right now. Now, I could get 2,400 users on that box if they were just task workers. So now I got this cost, and I divide by 2,400, I can get it. I can't do the math in my head, but that's significantly less than 750. So you've got to really understand when vendors make statements, as there's no industry standard, it's how long is a piece of string. Hopefully I've given you some ammunition to sort of ask the right questions. Because believe me, you don't want to get in a situation where you've got unhappy users. I mean, that's the real difference between server virtualization and client virtualization. Well, the only difference is the word virtualization, because in the one case you're dealing with a server. Your users don't know when you virtualize the server, but they sure know when you put them on a VDI implementation, especially if you get it wrong. So be warned. So this is just, this is again from the white paper. We actually, detail out how we suggest or recommend you lay out the clusters. And you can see on the right-hand side there, we've got, the management cluster. We've got our blade controllers for the storage, and the storage sits on the bottom. And then, you don't have to actually do it this way, but we've got, obviously 4 clusters there. They could be distributed across the 2 enclosures. And then on the left-hand side, we detail out how, this is a schematic of how we wire up the Flex 10 modules from the blade, from the hypervisor through the storage controllers, through the 3 gigabyte SAS switches into the storage. So we really have done a whole lot of work here, folks, to try to make it really simple to roll out a VDI implementation. And the folks that put their hands up earlier on and are in production, I'm sure you can tell some stories, right, of how difficult this really is. So I would emphasize, I couldn't emphasize any stronger actually, that you really need to get some help. HP has a portfolio of services. If you don't use HP, use one of our, we have a lot of partners that we jointly share with VMware who have made investments in this space. Get somebody in who has done this before. Don't try to, and don't be the guinea pig for them. Make sure they've got a track record of rolling out VDI implementations. You can read here what we can offer, and this is typical of what you'll get from one of our channel partners as well. But I mean, let me just give you, if I got time, let me just give you a scenario just to explain to you, why this gets complex in a hurry. If you imagine, for example, you have a central office and you've got, I don't know, half a dozen branch offices with different pipes going out to those branch offices, and you want to implement a VDI solution. What are the things you look at? Well, you don't dive into the technical right away. You look at your user requirements. So do I use terminal services or VDI? Do I centralize? Is security a key issue to me? So do I centralize everything in the main office, in my main data center? Then I have to deal with WAN issues. Can I afford the WAN to go down and my branch office to be stranded and not, without work? Do I have to go, get a backup WAN because most of that stuff's out of my control, right? Or do I take a smaller VDI implementation and put it out in those branch offices? Okay, I'm giving up a little bit on my security, but then I can have all my folks in the branch office running locally on the LAN, and I can sync back to the main data center maybe in the evenings. So these are some of the considerations you think of, and are the folks in the branch office mobile? Do I need to think about client hypervisor technology on their laptops to make sure that when they're wandering around they've got something to do? So there's a lot of considerations even before you get to considering the technology side of the thing, right? What servers do I need? What storage? WAN acceleration. On and on and on. There's technical issues, but getting the understanding of what your users are doing is very critical. So I would highly recommend you get help from someone who's done it before. Here's a couple of examples of customers that we've been working with, and as Lloyds Bank, for example, is a Blade workstation example where they really needed to get to the point where they could get folks trading from anywhere they want, and they also wanted to cut down on their IT costs. So they actually moved into a new building and implemented a Blade workstation. So I don't know whether anybody been in a trading room, but there's like many screens, many workstations. It's hot, it's noisy. All of that goes away, right, because you move it all into the data center. We talked about the healthcare example, and there it's really getting access to patient data and very quickly from anywhere. And then in the education, we're seeing a lot of interest in the educational field because it's a win-win for both students and teachers there. So just skip through that real quick. So I wanted to. So let me just summarize, and then maybe there might be a few questions. We've got a few minutes left. So I would say if you're looking at a Win 7 upgrade or a desktop refresh, which I'm sure many of you are, this is a good time to start thinking about these various technologies, where they fit in your environment. We have a bunch of tools and white papers on our website. There's the URL at the bottom there. Right on the front of the website, you can download the white paper, which details step by step how to put the reference architecture together, how we sized it, how we come up with the numbers that we came up with. So hopefully that will help you. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have a TCO tool out there where you can sort of plug in numbers and do what-ifs to see whether this makes sense. So with that, I'm just going to open up for anybody. Got any questions?
For PC over IP, for PC over IP, we're seeing a lot of those knowledge worker workloads enhanced by that. Teradici has a PC over IP offload card, but it's 8x PCIe, and it's not available in a mezzanine that I'm aware of yet. So for those PC over IP workloads, are you doing any work in non-Blade form factors with a Teradici offload card?
Do you want to answer that, Dan? Come on, get up there. Yeah, you can. We just happen to have the expert sitting in the front row here.
Okay.
So I'm Dan Nordhus. I manage client virtualization solutions for marketing in HP. So we've been talking to Teradici. They're somebody a technology that we always track. Today they only have a one-to-one offering available. So anything that goes, beyond one-to-one, so if you want to put multiple users and actually do VDI, it's a future technology, right? So today, PC over IP does not work with hardware accelerated graphics present in the system. If it's there, it ignores it. I believe that's also a future, but you'd have to talk to VMware. So from a future perspective, when we can put multiple users on a device with accelerated graphics, then we'll take a look at going that direction. Okay, but today we're looking at a broad set of technologies, whether it's with VMware, with other tier one partners in the virtualization space. One of the things that HP is extremely committed to is graphics accelerated VDI. So today, one of the experiences, and the reason we have the Blade Workstation, and HP recognized this, we've been shipping that product since 2006, but it is also one-to-one. Okay, it uses our protocol called RGS, but we're supporting other protocols on it going forward. It also supports Citrix HDX today. So we're going to offer that choice when the technologies get there, but also as graphics acceleration becomes part of the hypervisors, where you can actually put VMs that understand hardware graphics. We're going to be there, moving that direction. Okay, so look for this to, come, first half of 2011. You'll see some introductions in technology, and broadening out as we get to 2012. Okay, and that'll include PCO-IP. We're just not there yet. Okay. Anybody else have questions?
One more. Halfway through, you talked about the partitioning, and you showed your management interface and your production interfaces. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those production interfaces can be DMZ exposed traffic, and of course your management interface is typically called an admin high traffic. Have you done any work as a vendor submitting a reference hardening guide to the common criteria standards bodies to certify for security folks that is an assured accredited platform? Because a lot of times today they're thinking, well, here's this physical network segment, and I have an accredited device between it, and here is another physical network segment. And now as you're merging all of this traffic, of both it might be, your threat traffic coming from outside and your admin high into that, now that partitioning has to have that same level of standard body accreditation. Like common criteria, at least, is one, EAL level 4, just like vSphere is accredited for EAL level 4+. Anything like that on the converged networks?
I don't know the answer to that question. You? It's an interesting question.
So I think everybody heard the question since it was on the mic, but we probably need some of our Virtual Connect people to answer that directly. I know that we do, from at least a U.S. government perspective, that Virtual Connect has passed their ability to, because you get nervous real quick when you have. You saw one of the slides Nigel put up where you can virtually say, okay, I want 800 megabits here and I want 2 gig here, and the fact that it keeps them separate and not crossed, and so there's not security issues there. But as far as answering your question about exactly which we pass or subscribe to, I don't think we can answer that today, but we can follow up if you send us some email.
Yeah, the beauty of our reference architecture is that nothing really aggressors the rack. We don't have cables coming out the back going to a separate storage system. It's all self-contained. But yeah.
Any other questions?
Thanks for all coming.